Hello, my name is Dr. Marcy Littlefield, and today I want to talk to you about poverty, the meaning of poverty, and how it's calculated in the United States. You have to really understand poverty. Poverty is really the difference between life and death. And there are a few examples which really help us to understand that in our society, one of which would be Hurricane Katrina. In this video, you can see that a lot of the residents are still there when the hurricane hit. And part of what distinguished between those who stayed in New Orleans during that time period had everything to do with income and wealth. Those who had more money were able to leave. Those who did not were not able to leave, and they experienced what poverty looked like once the hurricane hit. Another example is Hurricane Harvey. This is a picture in Houston of what poverty looked like and what the city looked like after the hurricane hit. And once again, poverty is about what your life chances are. What access to resources do you have to get out of a situation if it is detrimental to your health? The COVID-19 virus is also a really good example of thinking about how poverty really is completely defined by racial and ethnic status. Those who were more likely to experience COVID had different health effects, and those health effects again had everything to do with your life chances. If you have more access to resources, more access to health care, more access to food, more access to education, just a whole combination of what it looks like if you have more access to resources, which is what life chances really describes, really gives a true definition of those who were exposed to and got COVID-19 and those who did not. There's been a lot of discussion about why COVID hit minority communities in greater proportions than other communities, but it really is a larger discussion about poverty and what poverty looks like. Max Weber, famous sociologist, really gave a whole lot of context for us to really understand why society looks the way that it does, and in particular why American society looks the way that it does. Max Weber came up with the whole context of helping us understand class, status, and power. And part of what Max Weber wanted to say is that if you are thinking about what social economic status looks like in this country, you have to really understand the context in which people have different access to resources. And that access to resources is really what defines the differences between the have and the have-nots. Those who make more money have more access to all the things which make your life better. Those in the upper class have more access to those resources than those who are in the lower class. And that really defines the differences and why social economic status and where you are and what life chances you have access to is really a life and death discussion. It really describes the differences between different groups of people. There's a difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty is a term which says that you can't meet your basic needs, and it really doesn't matter what country you live in. Relative poverty, on the other hand, looks at where you are in the society in which you live in. So those who are at the bottom of the social stratification system have less resources than those who are at the top. And again, this is just the whole context of thinking about how Max Weber defined the context between why wealth, power, and prestige are really important in society. What does that mean? It means that living in a society and how much money you have is not the only determining factor in what resources look like. And in American society, resources have everything to do with your access to quality of life and what you're able to do. Again, absolute poverty means you can't meet your basic needs, and that is a term which is defined across the board. And it is defined in other countries as in all countries as being living on less than $1.90 a day, compared to relative poverty as how much you have as it relates to people who live in the same society as you do. So as we define poverty and as we think about what poverty looks like, absolute poverty means you can't meet your basic needs. Relative poverty means that you have less resources than others in the same society. And subjective poverty is a state in which a family really feels like they don't have enough to get by. But what happens and what you're able to do in society has everything to do with where you fall. And part of the problem with the calculation of what poverty looks like in the United States has to do with how that definition is defined. In the United States, the definition of poverty, they really look at food and how much food you are. And it's really, it's problematic for a number of reasons, but in terms of how it's calculated by how much you actually need to maintain a healthy diet times 3. And that's how they come up with the actual poverty line. A lot of the discussion around why this is problematic has to do with who is considered poor and what that definition looks like. If you are outside of that definition of the calculation, which they come up with the number, if you are $1 over that calculation, then you don't get access to those resources. And while food is one measure of poverty, the problem is that it also includes rent. It also includes childcare, transportation. And it really is also a context of what social status looks like. Those who have wealth and have less income live differently than those who don't have wealth. So poverty is a much larger conversation that has everything to do with where you are in society and what your social status looks like. So the problem with the way the federal poverty line is defined and what it looks like in the United States is that it's defined on a food calculation, does not take into account rent, where you live, and any of those other factors, which also may be an expense, a real expense that you have in society. And that's why certain families really look different across the board by state, by race, and by income.